Welcome to the VX breakout session for government, and thank you for spending your valuable time with us. I'm Dale Stockton, managing partner of Public Safety Insight, a consulting firm that advises public safety agencies and vendors. I've spent 32 years working in all areas of police operations and investigations, and for the last several years, I've been deeply involved in tech efforts supporting public safety. I'll be serving as the moderator for today's program. This past year has been defined by just incredible change, with a rapid move to remote workers and changes in government workforce processes, technology, infrastructure. They've both been tested to the core. Today we'll hear from industry analysts and experts in the field as they share their report on the new administration's top priorities and investments in technology to modernize. With increased reliance on tech and cloud computing, security is a top concern. Join in the conversation to learn about the federal data strategy and the adoption of new systems to both support the work from home teams as well as in office. We'll also hear from some key Samsung team members on solutions designed specifically around the need for enhanced cybersecurity and supporting a mobile workforce. You'll meet those panel members in just a few minutes, but first it's my pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Dan Snyder from Bloomberg Government. Dan will provide informed analysis of what the new administration's spending priorities are most likely to be. Dan's the director of government contracting analysis at Bloomberg, and he specializes in identifying the largest contracts in the federal government and advising clients on related research. Before Bloomberg, Dan was an analyst focused on GSA, VA, federal supply schedule consulting. He holds an undergraduate degree from Siena College and both an MBA and an MS in government contracts from George Washington University. With that, I'll turn it over to Dan.
Good afternoon, and Dal, thank you so much for that kind introduction. I think your comments about a significant year of change are certainly true in many of the instances that we are experiencing within federal agencies. I want to thank Samsung for having Bloomberg Government present today. It is my pleasure to present some of the activities that are occurring government-wide around the new administration and what those priorities in investing in tech and innovation. So let's take a look at our first slide here. And this is around the overall budget activity. And I would assume the one number that probably pops out at you here is the overall $103 billion. And I certainly want to focus our attention on the left-hand side for a brief moment, just so we understand how the Pentagon, civilian agencies, as well as the three-letter intelligence agencies are allocating their budget towards modernizing information technology. We have seen significant growth since about 2016. When that total was about $49 billion for civilian agencies, and it has bumped up slightly to about $53 billion overall. For intel agencies, it has remained mostly flat, ranging from about $10 to $11 billion, while the Pentagon is a similar storyline, marginal increases of about $2 billion. Now, what does this mean in terms of what these agencies are doing with these funds? How are they operating, and what are they choosing to invest as we analyze the activities and the line items within these budgets overall? Well, a lot of these are common throughout many of the agencies because this is what the president's office is telling these agencies that they are required to do. Probably the most important is around this idea of cloud smart, and that deals with cloud computing and the implementation of bringing agencies to the cloud. So less storage on your hardware device, more storage in the cloud. Another common theme that we're seeing at all of these agencies is enhancing cybersecurity. As a component of this budget overall, we can tell and determine that agencies are operating with a budget of about $18 billion to secure the systems that are being used in the federal government. Another trend that we're seeing at federal agencies is this push towards digital services. So what do we mean by that? Well, digital services encompasses a lot of the activities which reside at agencies like Veterans Affairs and helping our veterans book appointments. It could include activities at IRS and paying your taxes. It could also include activities at SSA if you're drawing from your benefits and interacting with those websites. The federal agencies certainly want to make that as easy as possible to minimize confusion for their customers who are the taxpayers. Another trend that we highlight and would see consistent year over year is the implementation of federal data strategy. And that pivot towards applying artificial intelligence tools to use that data more effectively. So I don't think it should come as a surprise that a lot of data continues to be collected, but they're really developing more techniques to learn how to better use that data. And of course, a lot of that is done by machine learning and artificial intelligence. And then the last two that we also wanted to briefly mention is the telecom infrastructure and modernizing some of those very old systems. There is a major overhaul happening in the federal government that is dealing with the crux of the operation in sharing those communications. So that is more effectively using the information available to federal government agencies and disseminating that to the state and the local operations so that it can be used more timely and more effectively once it arrives at those lower level departments. And then the last one is developing federal IT workforce. And with that, we certainly mean contracting professionals, so people that are managing this contract. But as it relates to information technology, there's certainly more of an effort to develop the skills around coders or people that are cybersecurity practitioners so that they can have the best skill set available at these federal agencies to combat these enormous problems that continue to face our nation each year. We wanted to highlight some of the federal spending trends that we are seeing occur government-wide. So the one thing that I mentioned in our introduction is this is a really good time to be entering the federal government as a business doing work with federal agencies. We just completed our largest year on record. And that is mostly the result of two activities coming to a head at the same time. The one is a continued year-over-year growth that is gaining momentum at federal agencies. And then the second is a byproduct of the COVID-19 pandemic, which by our estimates at Bloomberg Government and tracking the government spending added an additional $43 billion on top of a large year that was forecasted since the onset. So even before the pandemic, even before we had additional funding available to us with the CARES Act, we were on pace for one of the largest years on record. Initially, before the pandemic, it was expected to be somewhere about $620 to $640 billion. Once we sprinkled that additional pandemic funding on top of it, we were able to land at 681, which blew most of the previous years out of the water. As you can see, if you look at the blue chart, a lot of those funding activities are concentrated in the Pentagon agencies. They make up about $445 billion in fiscal 2020, whereas civilian agencies make up $236 billion overall. Looking out into the future, so that is fiscal 2021, once we conclude this year's activities on September 30th, we're expecting somewhat of a tapered spending compared with fiscal 2020. There's certainly a lot more money that is going to be dispersed related to the COVID pandemic. But it's likely not going to be as high as what we experienced in fiscal 2020, because a lot of the research and development around the vaccines and funds to help agencies reach their telework objectives has largely been accomplished. But there's still going to be a lot of funding required around activities such as the logistics to get these vaccines in the arms of many of its citizens. And that is certainly going to take a lot of funding to accomplish. So by our estimates, we're anticipating somewhere between $650 to $660 billion that is likely to be dispersed at the end of the fiscal year. Next, we wanted to point your attention to some individual information technology markets and what the growth in these markets really looks like in the coming year. Before we get into the numbers, just to distinguish between the two different colored bullets, one is in blue, one is in green. The ones that are covered in green are individual markets identified precisely by the federal agencies. So this is what they define markets in that make up overall information technology spending that is dispersed to federal contractors each year. And in that taxonomy, they have 6 different categories, such as IT outsourcing, IT consulting, and IT hardware, and others. Overall, those markets make up a combined 75 billion or closer to 76 billion. And then the bubbles in blue are what we at Bloomberg Government have defined. And those go in a little bit more granular detail to really get under the surface about how these federal agencies are dispersing funds around key markets such as artificial intelligence, cloud services, and cybersecurity. So overall, if we first look at the government-defined markets, IT outsourcing is the largest market with about 8% growth and comprises $47 billion overall. If we transition to the Bloomberg government-defined markets, you'll notice a market such as artificial intelligence is not necessarily the largest amongst these, but it is growing at a much faster pace, about 50% on the Pentagon side, than any of the markets that you see illustrated here throughout. In addition to artificial intelligence, we would also highlight cloud services, which you spoke about in the budget, and relate that to what is being dispersed to federal contractors. By our estimate at Bloomberg, it's about $7.5 billion and continues to grow at a pace of about 25%. Another one that I would highlight that I think we'll spend a little bit more time talking about at length is the category for IT hardware, which is the second largest after IT outsourcing. And IT hardware makes up about $15.5 billion. So the IT hardware is continuing to grow. We're seeing a rate of about 5% around IT hardware, which is likely the result of a lot of new products that were needed and required to help government officials satisfy their work from home and work remote needs. And that is likely to continue to be important in this coming fiscal 2021. Okay, so where does that leave us in terms of what's ahead? There's a lot that lies ahead in terms of the new administration. We have a new chief information officer, which is likely to change a lot of the activities around the information technology strategy at large. But we wanted to force ourselves to hopefully invigorate a more healthy discussion about what is going to immediately occur and what is at the forefront of activities right now as these agencies are performing functions. The first one that we wanted to highlight is around that COVID-19 spending will continue to drive agency budgets. We've seen the 5th straight year of overall growth, and it's unlikely that that is going to be minimized in the out years. It's it's going to continue to keep pace with activities that we have seen as agencies fund the logistics efforts and adapt to the COVID-19 atmosphere. The second is this idea around an AI-focused government initiative. And what I find funny about this one is the government has established that agencies come up with a strategy to use artificial intelligence and machine learning more effectively. And if we analyze some of this, the budget numbers around that, we're seeing this idea of whitewashing. So by that, we mean something that wasn't artificial intelligence last year, but now as we see it in the budget categories for this year, it includes a component of artificial intelligence. And we're expecting that to increase and be used more so because it's a way and an instrument that many of these agencies can get more funding for their projects. So AI-focused government initiatives will continue strongly and continue to grow at a rate of about 40 to 50% in fiscal 2021. The next one we wanted to take a look at is telework is here to stay. By and large, I do think there is an overall consensus that contracting officers have modified contracts. They are writing requests for proposals as good, if not better, than they did before the pandemic occurred. So there's no hindrance to these individuals working from home. And if we can accommodate that more effectively, it could be a cost-saving mechanism for the government in fiscal 2021 and beyond. The fourth one that we wanted to take a look at is this idea of digital services. So we talked about what that means in making the operations that agencies rely on to be able to be used more effectively. And this was a trend that was largely important even before the pandemic, but has only been even more largely perpetuated as a result of the pandemic and making these services available online instead of employing people to answer calls for Medicare at something like a call center. If you can make these user interfaces more effective and your digital services operate more cleanly, there's going to be less of a demand for agencies to sustain those internally. And then the last one is agencies will rethink education and training platforms. So as we are presenting to you remotely today, agencies are doing the same thing. There is no more remote work is going to be embraced by federal agencies. It's not something that they need to be on an Army base in a classroom dictating instructions or training to many of these government officials. I think that the digital platform is something that agencies have accepted, embraced, and are willing to make work. So with that, I will bring it to our panel. I'm looking forward to participating and bringing into the fold some of the participants who are subject matter experts at Samsung.